The devices were always an interesting inclusion in Ratchet & Clank future tools of destruction. The devices were essentially just weapons, but not as versatile. They were more situational. There were 8 different devices in this game, having varying different uses, such as stealing health from enemies, fighting enemies for you, turning enemies into penguins, and last but not least, making the enemies boogie. Anyways, it always got me wondering, is Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction even possible with only these devices? That's what we're gonna figure out today. Before getting started, let me just straight up get the rules out of the way. The only rule is we are only allowed to attack enemies with the devices. This should be easy enough, right? One more thing before we get started. This isn't necessarily rules, it's more so just tips and tricks. So essentially, there are 2 things that are going to make this way more possible. One, for some reason in Tools of Destruction, vendors, whether you buy something or not, just visiting a vendor full heals Ratchet. This will be very useful. Another thing is, device vendors aren't on every planet, which is going to be really, really bad for a challenge like this. Fortunately, there are these raritanium crates that would normally give you a lot of raritanium, but for us, they actually do drop ammo for the devices. So this will also be very handy since devices ammo can only come from the vendor. Let's stop lollygagging. Let's get right to it. Like I said during the rules, we are not allowed to use our wrench, and Kerwan was very easy. Every single enemy was 100% skippable, so we flew right through this level without killing a single enemy. We destroyed some crates here and there just because the devices will be expensive later on, so we're getting as many bolts as we can as early as we can. Now, Cobalia was a different story. Unfortunately, in order to progress through here, we actually had to kill these little centipede-looking dudes because unfortunately, the level just would not progress until we killed them. So we did unfortunately have to use our wrench. We did also have to defeat this Leviathan with the wrench as well, which means, is this possible devices only? Absolutely not. But we're going to try from this point forward to only use devices now that we have access to the devices vendor. Now I know what you guys are thinking, but Ninja, you have Groovatron and Leech Bomb. How are you possibly killing enemies? So, here comes the caveat. Here is how this is physically possible. We are only using devices, but we are allowed to use the wrench as long as the enemies are under the effect of a device. So, for example, if I throw out a Groovatron, I am able to hit that enemy as long as they are still under the effect of the Groovatron. If this rule was not put into place, it would physically be impossible with only devices to beat this game. So, obviously, to answer that question, no, you can't beat it with devices. But can you beat it with devices and limited wrench use? Let's find out. Now, in Strata City, we get access to the confuzzling gas. And essentially all this does is you basically get to throw it at the enemies, and it deals damage over time as well as confuses them and makes them attack the other enemies nearby. Now, this weapon also applies with our wrench rule. So if they are under the effect of the confuzzling gas, we can use our wrench to deal additional damage. This will be necessary later, which is why I'm explaining this rule now. Anyways, our strategy of just using the Groovatron confuzzling gas works very well to get us through the entirety of Strata City until the very end. Unfortunately, at the end of this level, there are little dropship droids who, unfortunately, are in a window. And I literally cannot even attack them with my wrench, because for some reason in this game, you cannot first-person aim with your wrench. You can first-person wrench throw, but it only goes straight. You can't aim it up, down, or in any direction. I have no idea why Insomniac did this. This was probably one of the stupidest decisions they've ever made, but because of that, I can't even confidently say that this challenge is possible at all. We've broken every single rule so far, but I really want to see how possible this game is with just devices and wrench. Even though we failed the challenge once again, I just want to see how far we can get without ever using a weapon again. That being said, it's time for Fastoon. Planet Fastoon was surprisingly simple. We were able to get all 6 ship parts while avoiding all enemies just by running past them. We didn't need to use the wrench at all, though I will say there was an obstacle that was impassable. This wall here is actually impossible to get through without using a weapon. So we did have to use the Shock Ravager, but the challenges are always to not use the weapons to kill enemies, so this wasn't a big deal. It was a little annoying though because the wrench did not work. It had to be an actual weapon. On to Macau, we head to the left path first, through the Path of Death 2 Electric Boogaloo, in order to obtain the Charge Boots, which were severely nerfed in this game, but are still very helpful for some skips later. Now when it comes to getting to the arena, this was brutal. Almost every enemy at this point instantly kills Ratchet, because we've been skipping so many enemies just due to the fact that we don't have enough ammo or anything to get through them. So we've been skipping so many enemies, leaving us severely underleveled. Most people by this time would have around 20 to 25 nanotech by the time you get to Macau. We have 11. One more than you start with. So it was very, very brutal getting to the arena, because we had to get through so many enemies that we just did not have the devices for. Once we finally made it to the arena, before entering, we broke the one rule that I usually try to throw in for a bonus challenge. We bought armor. You stink! This is one of the hardest Ratchet & Clank games in my opinion, and I feel like armor is just so necessary just due to how terribly scaled the enemy damage is in this game. So unfortunately, we will be buying armor, but trust me, for right now, it's not going to do much. We still only have the 11 health. The arena was not possible with devices. The enemies would just spawn way too far from each other for the confuzzling gas to work effectively. Leech bombs barely do any damage to these guys. And the Groovatron is nice, but unfortunately there's just far too many enemies that spawn during this challenge that it just was not possible in any way. So Macau is not possible with only devices. The first section of the Nudak Asteroid Ring was looking to be impossible. We needed to collect more Leviathan souls for the smuggler so that we can get the code to enter the Apogee space station. Unfortunately, the Leviathans on this level are insanely difficult to get to, as none of them are in a range at which we can kill them. We can Groovatron them and Hyperstrike a couple of them, but their movement patterns are just so unpredictable. Fortunately, I remembered that there are optional Leviathans on Cobalia that we actually skipped, and since we have infinite devices on that planet due to there being a devices vendor, we defeated these Leviathans instead, which gave us enough souls to move on. The Apogee space station was without a single doubt in my mind the hardest roadblock of this entire challenge. And it's mainly just because of the fact that almost every single enemy in this entire area is required to be killed. There are certain doors that won't open, certain areas you won't have access to if you do not kill all of the enemies here. The enemies are very powerful, very quick, and very annoying, especially these turrets. These turrets have so much health. This is actually where the rule where I'm allowed to use the wrench during the confuzzling gas became a thing. Because without that rule, this planet would have 100% been impossible. So prior to this level, I actually never used the confuzzling gas and wrench. This was the level that made that rule a thing, because these turrets are ridiculous. Another thing about the turrets, and I don't know if this is just a glitch, but when you Groovatron them, you can't wrench them from the front, because even though they aren't actively shooting, their front still has a hitbox where it actually damages you still. So I died so many times just trying to kill these things, even while they were distracted with the Groovatron. What ended up happening was we kept running out of ammo. No matter how far we got, no matter how much we conserved ammo, we did not have enough. There are so many enemies in this space station. Tachion did not want anybody getting in, and honestly, I respect it. Unfortunately, we needed to get through, and it took me around 30 minutes before I remembered that this planet actually does have a devices vendor on it, but unfortunately it's on the outside portion. So I assumed, as soon as we left the space station, when we came back in, the enemies would respawn. That was actually not the case, and that was the strategy we went for. We basically killed as many enemies as we could, went back to the vendor, bought all the devices. Now again, these devices are insanely expensive, so I really didn't have the bolts for this either. So every time I died, I lost so much more bolts that this ended up being such a tedious grind. Eventually, after several times of going back and forth, getting more devices, we were finally able to clear every single enemy. We then meet Kronk, Zephyr, and Ratchet's girlfriend, Tachion Apogee. We decide to head to the pirate planet Ardolus. The first section of Ardolus was easy. We could skip almost every enemy until we get into this crowded room with all the pirates. We started with the confuzzling gas to clear out the first 2 waves of these pirates, and then we used the Groovatron wrench to take out the last of them. In this level, we had to backtrack to the devices vendor a lot, but it's not too far of a hassle right now. We use the confuzzling gas to take care of this electric guy. The confuzzling gas surprisingly does a ridiculous amount of damage, and this is definitely something that I did not expect. I was expecting this to be one of the worst devices, but it is actually really good. The damage it does over time is crazy. Anyways, the rest of this level wasn't much of an issue. We just had the same strategy throughout the rest of the level until we got to the end. By the time we got to the pirate juggernaut, we were completely out of devices, and at this point we couldn't go back and get devices again. So unfortunately, we did have to use the wrench on this boss. I'm sure this boss would have been possible if we had our ammo for the devices, but unfortunately I just didn't have ammo, making Ardolus unfortunately not possible without full wrench use. After clearing Ardolus, we find a hidden artifact that will help us in the search for the Lombax secret. It guides us to Reichen 5. Reichen 5 was a tedious planet. This level has us remembering that time we halo jumped with that Lombax in his robot backpack. After landing, we face many waves of enemies. The good news is, even though we have a ton of enemies to deal with very limited ammo, we can honestly just sit back and relax doing absolutely nothing, because in the end of the day, Kronk and Zephyr will take care of every single enemy here. It will take a very long time, but with enough patience and dodging ability, we can actually do this entire first section. After this section, we are greeted to our next available device, that being Mr. Zircon, who is now available in the devices vendor for 5,000 bolts each. Mr. Zircon is without a doubt one of the best devices in this entire game. As you guys know, he stepped up after being a device in this game, got the weapon promotion in 5 other games after this one. So clearly Mr. Zircon was not messing around, and for this challenge he's going to be absolutely necessary to clear out tons and tons of enemies. Anyways, after this section, all we had left was a quick gyro cycle to the end of the level, and that was it for Reichen 5. At the end of Reichen 5, the Lombax secret was not there. Instead, we had a Microsoft PowerPoint telling us that it is in Sargasso. And apparently the Lombax secret that the Lombaxes invented was a hat. That's fairly comical, but not as comical as
Stunderwear. Huge seller on Umbris.
By the way, I have 3 pairs. Sargasso was an interesting planet to say the least. We again had to collect some Leviathan souls for the smuggler to get the decryptor, which has one of the best hacker musics in the game. I mean, listen to this. Anyways, we are able to kill these Grunthors with our current device loadout. Groovatron and Mr. Zircon were a very good combo. Now, while defeating the required Grunthors, this is where something interesting happened. I was killing this Grunthor with the wrench and the Groovatron, and every time I hit him with my wrench, he moved back a little bit. And then this happened. What the f***? Oh, I did that glitch! Yo, let's fuck go! I pushed the Grunthor into the mud, which not only killed the Grunthor instantly, but also caused this insane glitch. This glitch made it so the Grunthor was dying on every single frame while the Groovatron was still active. Since he was dying over and over again, I kept getting more and more XP, bolts, and most importantly, Leviathan souls. Needless to say, our grind for Leviathan souls was over, and so was our bolt grind, which is awesome considering how expensive these devices are now and how expensive they will be in the future. And I understand a lot of people could say, oh, well, Ninja, you cheated. This isn't how the game was intended to be played. You should have to suffer and do a bolt grind. First of all, I did not intend for this to happen. I knew this glitch was a thing, but I never knew how to do it. Secondly, grinding for bolts is the most boring thing forever. So yes, I could have grinded for more bolts for devices, but this just makes the challenge and the video go on way smoother, and it just makes things way more consistent so I don't have to keep bolt grinding. So we will have plenty of bolts throughout the rest of the playthrough to purchase our very expensive devices. And fortunately, with all the Grunthors dying, we also did get a huge boost in nanotech, putting us around where we should be now. The rest of Sargasso really wasn't that much of a problem. Again, our Groovatron Zircon Wrench combo is really, really powerful. It is one of the most powerful strategies we are going to have at this current moment. So we finished Sargasso with no further issues. Our next planet was a revisit to Macau. And this time it was not only possible, it was hilariously possible. All we have to do is beat this little blue spinning flame dancer looking guy, and the devices do not do enough damage to defeat this boss. Fortunately, he's an idiot and has a move where he spins towards us. All we have to do is bait him into running into the lava here, instantly killing him. This strategy was absolutely hilarious to me. This definitely made this easy and 100% possible without any devices. Anyways, with him dead, we now get the pirate disguise, allowing us to move on to my favorite level in the game, the Crely Comet. And on Crely Comet, we start off by dancing the jig of a pirate. And honestly, even though I kind of hyped up this level, there really isn't a lot going on for it. Mr. Zircon is really, really effective against the pirates, killing them in anywhere from 3 to 4 shots. We had a couple close calls with the electric guys, just given how fast they are in the small corridors that we had to kill them. There were also a few of these juggernauts, but throughout this entire planet, we had access to a devices vendor. No matter where we were, we could always just backcheck to a devices vendor. So it wasn't really ammo that was a problem, it was more so just our health. But for the most part, we died a couple times here and there, but other than that, Crely Comet was honestly a cakewalk. We now head to planet Visceron, Zordoom Prison. After sneaking through some of the deadly security, we get access to the Visicopter. This is basically just a remote control Mr. Zircon. It's just a helicopter that we can control, kind of like the spider bot from Going Commando. It basically just shoots rapid fire missiles. It does a good amount of damage and it lasts a decent bit. But honestly, when it comes to overall usefulness, this is going to be one of our most used devices throughout the playthrough just because of the fact that it does direct damage. It does, however, cost 10,000 bolts, which is absolutely absurd. Now, when it came to the actual level, getting to Tachion Cell was actually very easy for us, since we now have the Visicopter for the additional damage. The way back to our ship was a lot harder. First of all, the Visicopter apparently does not work on this elevator, so I guess that's kind of cool. On our way out with Tachion, we are introduced to the invisible droids. These enemies are a pain. Basically, they're invisible until they take physical damage, and unfortunately, Mr. Zircon can't see them until they're already revealed. Now, it does seem like they do reveal themselves naturally after a few seconds, which is helpful, because the only devices we have that can reveal them are the Leech Bomb and the Groovatron. So I did make sure to save as much ammo for these as possible, strictly for the invisible guys. Our plan for the next section was to skip as many enemies as possible, and most of them were skippable. The only downside is that we died a decent amount of times here, because unfortunately every enemy that I skipped is now directly targeting me. This next room locks us in a room with a few droids spawning at a time, but with some quick thinking and some good strategy, we're able to get through here no problem. The final section just has a bunch of enemies that were all entirely skippable. Not too bad for a prison escape. Now that we escaped prison, it is time for Justindu, the planet you've all been waiting for. First things first, we are immediately greeted by our next device, those being the Transmorphers. These are essentially just bombs that transform enemies into defenseless, cute little penguins. This device is actually really busted. Almost every enemy can be transformed. It has a huge radius which can transform multiple enemies with one shot, and every enemy is able to be killed instantly with any weapon, including the wrench. And it only costs 8,000 bolts each, which isn't that bad comparatively to some other things. Now, when it comes to the actual planet Justindu, it was pretty easy, surprisingly, but I know you don't care about that. You want to know how the boss fight went. Everybody knows this boss is a pain in the neck. Everybody hates this boss. This boss fight starts off with a grind rail section where you have to dodge some missiles. This first section isn't too difficult. Once we're finished with the grind rail section, we start off on this ceiling. Now, the ceiling is normally the optimal place to fight this boss, because all the boss really has is like punching moves, which sends shockwaves towards Ratchet, but this really isn't that hard to dodge. But unfortunately for us, we can't hit the boss with devices from up here. We just don't have the range. So we had to head to the floor for the actual boss fight. Now again, this boss fight really doesn't have much going for it. It just sends out these ball Kirchus, which are annoying because they do a lot of damage and they're very fast. Other than that, the only move that he can really do is he can just crush us with his wheels, which was a problem a few times. Our strategy for this fight was a pretty solid one. Mr. Zircon would tend to target the Kirchu balls, so we used the boss's wheels to our advantage and had him run them over so that Zircon could focus all of his fire on the boss. During the time when the Kirchus were dead, I would use my Groovatron and Wrench to deal as much damage as possible, while Mr. Zircon was also out dealing as much damage to the boss. Once the Groovatron ended, I used the Visicopter while he spawns more Kirchu balls. Fortunately for us, Ratchet is actually entirely invulnerable while the Visicopter is in use, which is absolutely broken. So other than a few unlucky attempts, this strategy was beautiful. But my biggest concern wasn't the approach to the boss, it's just the amount of health that this boss has. There's absolutely no chance that the devices would do enough damage. This is a very powerful boss. And to my surprise, the devices were actually able to 100% beat this boss. And I cannot believe in any way that this boss was actually possible with only devices. After defeating this boss, we finally, after hours of searching, find the Dimensionator. Of course, before we can celebrate and, take it, it immediately gets stolen by Captain Slag.
He is going to pay!
I don't mean to just start skipping through levels, but Slag's fleet was honestly pretty dang easy just because of the different number of devices we now have. Now when it comes to the Slag boss fight, that one was a little bit less easy. But to be brutally honest, this fight was much easier than the Justindu boss. Slag has a lot more moves that we had to dodge, some of them being relatively tricky to dodge. The only real difference in our strategy this time was that this boss fight has 4 different cycles, and after each cycle, Slag would leave the stage for a bit and call backup. This prevented him from taking any damage. So basically all this meant was that we had to be very careful with what devices we used to do certain amounts of damage. For example, say we used Visicopter or Mr. Zircon and we only did 5% of his health before he fled. That would be a huge waste of ammo and would likely prevent us from defeating him. He does have a lot of health and we do have very limited ammo. In order to beat him with the devices we have, the ammo to health ratio for Slag was pretty much the same as it was for the Justindu boss. We weren't able to waste any ammo, so we had to be very strategic. To be honest though, Slag really wasn't that bad. We were able to take him out on our 3rd try. After the Slag boss fight, some bozo once again steals the Dimensionator to give it to the enemy. Man, who would ever do that? Who would ever betray Ratchet? I mean, come on. Well, now it's time for the Kragmite Home planet, Repor. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I stood behind the vendor and let Croc and Zephyr do all of the work. I mean, I jumped out occasionally to help. I know it's scummy, but after this initial section, there are actually a few required enemies, and they are very, very powerful. So I mainly just wanted to save the ammo for these guys, because they took a lot of our devices just to kill one of these, Strider dudes. Anyways, after we get to the end, we meet up with Tachyon, and he uses the Dimensionator to find the Kragmites. Oh, and Ratchet dies. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. It's unfortunate that Ratchet died, but it does happen. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you click that like button and know that I am kidding. I'm kidding, guys. We still have to do that one level that just doesn't fit at all in this game and honestly just ruins the pacing of the end of the game. What was it called again? Oh yeah, Igliak, where we get the Death Springs. These things suck. I won't even talk about them. They are an absolute waste of time, money, effort, programming, and everything. They are useless. Damn! Anyways, other than the enemies that are in this room, every other enemy was basically skippable. I'm sorry to rush through Igliak. I know a lot of people like Igliak, but this video is long enough and there really isn't a lot to cover. The strategies we have set in place right now are really solid, and the devices we have are really good, and more so abundant. We finally have multiple options to do, which is something we didn't have in the beginning and middle of the game. So it feels good to have this openness. That being said, it is now time for the final planet in the game, Fastoon. Again. The first section of Fastoon had us destroying 5 cannons that are preventing Tachion from landing. I genuinely don't know what I was thinking. I must have been on autopilot, but I used my wrench to take them all out. I'm certain they would have been possible with devices, I'm just an idiot. After we destroy those, Tachion lands, and we basically need to guide her, Kronk, and Zephyr to the bridge so that they can lower it. This takes a massive toll on our devices. Honestly, had we used the devices for the turrets here, I don't know if we would have had enough to take these enemies out. But to be brutally honest, it didn't matter because I ran out of devices anyways and just had to sit here and wait patiently for the 3 of them to actually take the enemies out. So I'm sure even if we would have used devices on the turrets, we would have just needed patience for the rest of this part, just waiting for them to take them out. Anyways, after Kronk, Zephyr, and Tachion finally lower the bridge, the entire next section is the exact same thing. I stood here for 10 minutes, waiting for my girlfriend and her crazed robot companions to take their sweet time taking out all the enemies. Once we finally got into the next area, we have access to a devices vendor, which is the greatest news ever. This was the final section of the game before the final boss, so it was bound to be tedious. Fortunately, having access to unlimited devices from the vendor, as well as unlimited health refills from the vendor, proved to be very handy. It took a lot of time and this section was very difficult, but with access to all of these things, it was only a matter of time before we defeated everybody and moved on to the final boss of this game, Emperor Tachyon. Emperor Tachyon was an absolutely brutal fight. For anybody who's not aware of this boss fight, he has a ridiculous amount of health. Not to mention his moves are pretty tough to dodge, and he has a lot of different moves. But again, my biggest concern isn't necessarily dodging, because I'm really good at dodging. My biggest concern is dealing the damage. We have access to every single device in the game, so I'm thinking that it should be possible. So I gave it my best attempt. And I can't believe I'm saying this even with my best attempt. We only got him down by 80%. We got him down to 20% of his health using every device we had. Unfortunately, and I'm very upset to say this, Emperor Percival Tachyon is actually 100% impossible to beat with only devices. Unfortunately, I wish this challenge was more accessible and was easier and more possible without all the technicalities. But when it comes down to it, this was a really fun challenge and I did have a really fun time just utilizing these unique ideas that were the devices. Would I ever want Insomniac to bring back the devices? No, there's absolutely no reason for them. Most of them became weapons anyways. But it was a really cool concept and I like that Insomniac gave it a shot. That being said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. If you hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, we will do a 100% playthrough of every single Ratchet & Clank game live right here on the Beninja channel. So if you guys want to see that, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And thank you so much to all of my members. You guys are absolutely amazing. Special shout out to Ayel L. Oises, I said that wrong, Alex, Lord Skittles Lordship, Alex Gaming 524, and last but certainly not least, Whiskey Tombstone and Simon Larson. Thank you so much for the continued support and the extra support of you guys. It really, really helps me make these videos even better every time. Let me know what challenge you guys want to see next. That's all I have for today. I will see you guys in the next one. Beninja out.